that we can post it for others to listen to. But thank you all for joining us today. We're going to be talking about the iPlatform system. We hope that this will be helpful for all of you, and it's a great tool that we look forward to having you all play around with yourself. I am Mike Schwartz, and I have been working with the Department of Education for quite some time, probably about 20 years or so now, providing support mostly in the area of technology and data. And I am pleased to be able to help present iPlatform to you all. I'm joined today with Dina Raybuck. Dina is the mastermind behind iPlatform. Dina has the wonderful combination of bringing some amazing database and technology skills along with a really solid understanding of the education system in New Hampshire. And so put those two things together, and she's really been able to spearhead the work behind iPlatform that you're going to see today. Dina, did you want to add anything else?
No, you Mike. You always do me a lot of justice.
You deserve it. And then I also am, we're not joined today by Lauren, but Lauren is also working with us. Lauren Mercier is also helping out with training and support for iPlatform. So she is also available for questions after today. What we are going to do is we're going to spend a little bit of time just talking about what iPlatform is all about. Why do we have it? What's kind of the purpose of it? I will walk you through some PowerPoint or Google slides that just show you iPlatform and where to get it, or to get access to it. And then we'll actually do a live demo. So we'll spend most of the time hopefully walking through iPlatform itself so that you can get a feel of what it looks like. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the upcoming schedule. In terms of logistics for this webinar, this is a webinar. We absolutely appreciate and encourage feedback, dialogue throughout it. So if you've got questions, please, you can go into the chat session and pose a chat item that we can all see, and I can help answer, or Dina can help answer. So please ask questions as we go forward. This webinar, as others, will be posted on the department's website, and you'll be able to access it at a later point. We'll either post this one, it depends on, we post lots of them, we don't necessarily post everyone, but there will be postings of the webinars as well. iPlatform is really an effort that's brought together a whole bunch of data that exists with the Department of Education. And the purpose is really to take that data and make it transparent and available to all different types of stakeholders throughout New Hampshire. The department has, because of the hard work of schools around the district, around the state, the department has built a really comprehensive database of student information about how schools are doing and how students are doing in those schools. The current commissioner really has a passion about helping make sure that all stakeholders in New Hampshire and beyond have access to this public data to help improve the education system. And I think he really believes that the more we can share data, the more we can make transparent how schools are doing, the better we can all work collectively to help continue to improve education. There is a lot of data, as I mentioned, and there's a lot of data that isn't necessarily easy to look at. The purpose of iPlatform is to take that information and put it in a format that makes it easy and meaningful for you to take a look at. And that's what Dina really has worked hard to make happen. There is data in the databases in the department that talk about academics like math and ELA and science. There's data in the department that talks about information like dropout rates or suspension information or teacher information. There's information in the department's website about charter schools and regular public schools and different parts of the state, where schools are located. All that information, again, is pulled together and then presented in the aggregate, so in total counts, to any stakeholder. So this is a public system. The data that you're seeing is not, it's not private personal data, it's aggregate summary data. So it means how many students are enrolled in a grade, what percentage of students graduated from this high school. So it's not divulging anything about any individual student, and so it's maintaining their privacy, but it's giving us all a vision of how schools are doing. Because it's public, and because the purpose of this is to get a lot of people to be able to take a look at it, the access to iPlatform is not secure. Like, you don't have to log into the system to get to it. You can just go to the department's website, and we'll see how you do that, and you can jump right into iPlatform. So it's really intended for anybody and everybody to take a look at the information. With that said, we really encourage you to do it. So we encourage you to go to iPlatform, whether you're doing it now as I'm talking or whether you do it after this training, and play around with the system. Because it's a no login required public system, it also means that you really can't break it. You're not going to do anything to the system that's going to hurt the data, hurt the system. There may be something that doesn't work right, and so we'll want that feedback. But we really encourage you again to play around with it. I should also mention one of the things that Dina really wanted to make sure was part of the system is the ability for us to enhance it and change it. So the iPlatform system is a system now that exists within the Department of Education in the state of New Hampshire's database systems or IT system. So we have that flexibility of continuing to enhance the system. So certainly as we look through this, especially from a special education perspective, as most of you are probably related to the special education field, let us know if we could add this. It would help you make more sense out of the information, or if there's something that's not clear, definitely let us know. Again, I just mentioned it briefly. I should have said it more directly at the beginning. Part of what we want to do with iPlatform in terms of this training is have training that helps a variety of different stakeholders take a look at the information. And so we've been trying to reach out to different groups. And so today's training is really focused for the folks who are working in special education. Having said that, we're going to be presenting the information in the system that is really good for all folks. But we hope that this will help the special education educators around the state. And again, if there's any questions about special ed or others, definitely ask as we go forward. iPlatform is broken up into two main components. There's iReport and there's iExplore. iReport is just as it kind of describes. It's a report, kind of like a report card that you might get for your student. So if you have a student in 8th grade that comes home with his or her report card, it talks about how he or she is doing. This is the same thing for the school or for the district. So it's a report for a school or a report card for a district. And we'll see it covers lots of different areas. It tells you about the achievement of the school. How is the school doing in terms of helping the students gain their math or their ELA or science proficiency? It talks about the environment. So what's the environment like? What percentage of kids are being suspended? What's class size look like? It talks about educators. What percentage of the educators are certified in the area they're teaching? So a lot of different information about the school or about a district. iExplore lets you do kind of what it says. It lets you explore. So you can explore not necessarily a school, but you're exploring an indicator across all schools in the state. So maybe something you were looking at in iReport, maybe you were looking at cost per pupil. And you wanted to know, well, I see what the cost per pupil is for the school, but what's it look like for the entire state? So then you would go into iExplore, and iExplore would give you that information. It lets you take an indicator like cost per pupil or percent proficient or suspension information. It lets you look across the entire state. How does that look for each school in the state or each district in the state? And then iExplore also lets you look at some kind of compare schools and do some other stuff. And we'll get into all of that when we go into iExplore. So that's what iPlatform is all about. It's a way to give data to schools, to the public, to help everybody understand more how the schools are doing in the state. What does it look like and how do you get to it? So we'll talk briefly about that, and then again, we'll jump right into a live demo. So in terms of how you get to iPlatform, the easiest thing to do is just to Google NHGOE iPlatform. As a matter of fact, I think if I just show you here, I can actually even just Google iPlatform NH. And when you Google that, Bing, whatever your favorite search tool is, most likely at the very top, if not the first thing, will be iPlatform. You click on that, and that'll bring you to the department's website. And also you'll see at the bottom of the department's website, on every page, you'll see a link to iPlatform there as well. Once you get to the iPlatform page, you will see on that first page, a link to iReport and to iExplore. And these are the main two features of iPlatform. The first is that report card that I just talked about, and the second is the way to explore. If you click on iReport, that will bring you into the iReport system. The first thing you have to do, because it's a report card, you're going to look at a given school or district. The first thing you have to say is, what school or district do I want to look at? And so it gives you a drop down. It gives you a way to filter out and say, I want to look for maybe all the schools in a certain town. Or if you know the school's name, you can just jump right to that school. Once you choose the school, you click View Report, and that's going to bring you into the iReport system. The iReport system, as you will see, has tabs across the top. And this allows you to look at every aspect of that school or that district. So just as I was just describing before, you can click on achievement to find out about achievement. You can click on educator to find out about the educators, finance to click about finance, sorry, to find out about finance. A new feature that you'll notice here is we even highlight the blue ribbon schools in the state. So for this year that I'm looking at, 2021, this school is a blue ribbon school. iExplore is featured just the way iPlatform is. There's tabs all across the top as well. And so this allows you to maneuver through iExplore. Whether you want to explore a given indicator, like I said before, you might be looking at cost per pupil across the entire state. Or if you want to search for a certain set of schools, or you want to download data. One of the things that you're able to do now is you can download the data directly to Excel or to Google Sheets and explore the data on your own computer. So all those features are here through tabs, and we'll again take a look at those in just a minute. For those of you who might have dabbled with iPlatform earlier, I just want to point out some changes. One of the things that you'll see just hot off the press this past week, we now have some IDA data that for 2021 that's in the system that we were waiting on finalizing before we posted. So that's now available, and we'll take a look at that. The blue ribbon school recognition that I just showed you is out there. There's some grade level comparisons, a great way now to compare how schools are doing or how you're doing compared to the state. We now are able to drill down at the grade level. That's, I think, an important feature that's now available, and I'll point that out. There's some information about charter schools that's available. There is better integration between iReport and iExplore, so you'll see where you can be in a report card and jump to iExplore if you want to see something in the iExplore system. There's some great download features. It's much more mobile friendly. So a lot of good enhancements for those of you who might have played around with this already. Okay, so let's dive in and take a look at a live demo. So I'm gonna, sorry about that. I'm gonna get out of the slide presentation. And again, if there are any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to ask. Okay, let's jump into iPlatform. So as I've said before, you can just Google for iPlatform, you come in, and let's first take a look at iReport. So clicking on iReport, as I mentioned earlier, the first thing that we're going to have to do is select the school or district we want to look at. So for my example here, I'm going to choose, I know the school, so I know it's going to be Portsmouth High School, or Portsmouth Middle School. So I'm just going to type in PORTS, and my list is going to limit to just the ones that match, and I can jump right to Portsmouth Middle School. If I didn't know the name of the school, maybe I'm a parent coming in and I want to think about moving to a certain town, I could also just choose the town, and it would have limited the list of districts or schools to the town I'm going to move to, or I'm thinking about moving to. So I click View Report, and this is now going to open up iReport. And as I mentioned earlier, we can now see a series of tabs across the top. It defaults to the area of this overview, and the overview tells you kind of an overview of the school, or the profile of the school, excuse me. It shows you where that school is located. It gives you information about the population of that school. It tells you who the principal is of that school. It tells you some information about economically disadvantaged. And then for those of you who deal with special education folks, it tells you the percentage of students who are on who have disabilities. So this is a percentage of students who are on an IEP. As I mentioned earlier, or I might not have actually mentioned, but I'll mention now, there's a lot of hovering where you can get some more detailed information. So this is a good example. If I hover over the 525, it actually pops up a little dialog box, and that tells you what the student population was for the past 3 years. So not only for 2021, but also for the last 2 years as well. And so in this case, we can see that the student population has stayed fairly steady. Same thing goes true with these indicators down here. So if I want to hover over the students with disability, actually, I got to move my little participant box here. We can see it gives you the history over the past 3 years of students with disabilities. So I can see we're 18.1 today. We're actually closer to 20 in 2019. So for one reason or the other, this population of students with an IEP have been decreasing in this school. So that's kind of an overview that when you first land on the iPlatform. I'll go through a series of these tabs. I won't necessarily go through all of them, but let me just give you a few of them. The overview tab gives you an overview of several of these other tabs. So it gives you an overview of achievement. So this achievement tab here gives you an overview of educators, like the educator tab, school environment tab. So this is an overview. It's kind of like the highest level information about these different indicators. So the achievement indicators that we're seeing here is the percent of students who are proficient in ELA, math, and science. So we can see 66% of the students in this school scored proficient on the state assessment test in English. And so I should point that out that these indicators are all pieces of information that are provided to the department in one way or the other. From an academic perspective, the way that schools are kind of we count for schools or look at how they're doing is through this state assessment test. And so the student achievement is looking at the state assessment test, which would include both the NHSAS as well as the DLM for students who have the most severe disabilities. So that combined average gets filled out into this ELA proficiency. There's a question, I guess, about how current the data is. So this data is now being released for 2021. So basically what this is kind of, for the most part, it's an annual snapshot of data. So you can go back in years, you can go back to 2018. We release the data as we have it available. So once for instance, the assessments that are being conducted now for 2022 in the state, we won't get that data finalized really until September or maybe into October. And so shortly after that, probably in November, we'll have the data released for the prior year. Same thing is true, once we get the finance data, which is typically not until later in the year for the prior year, we'll release the finance data, and the same with the IDEA data. Hopefully that answered the question. So let me jump to a couple of these. And so you'll see that this detail about educators or school environment, they look fairly similar on all these other tabs. So if I click on the achievement tab, for example, we'll see this achievement information that we just saw, like the 66% of students who are proficient in ELA. The summary we just saw, we see here. But also now on the achievement page, we see some other information. We see information about how that data looks in context with the state or the district. So you'll typically, for each one of these achievement, growth, environment, educator, you'll typically see the overall indicator. You'll see the indicator and how it relates in context to your school, your district, and your school. You'll see the indicator over time. So typically you'll see whatever the indicator is and how that looked over time, both for the district, the school, and the state. And then typically you'll see a breakdown of that information at a lower level of detail. So for example, in this case, where we know there's 66% of the students were proficient in ELA, we can actually go down here and see that actually of that 66, 28% were level 4. That's the highest level of proficiency on the state assessment. And 38 were level 3. So that's the next level of proficiency. That adds up to 66. So it breaks down the information into a little bit more detail. So for example, if you saw 66%, you'd have an understanding that even though you've got 66% of the students who are proficient, you still have a lot of students who can continue to improve because they're at the level 3, they're not at the highest level of proficiency. The next thing I want to point out is that you will typically also see arrows to the right. And those arrows then will give you even more detail about the information. And typically it'll break out that information into subgroups. So as an example, for folks who are working in the special education arena, this will then break out and say, okay, of there's 66% of the students overall in the state and the school were proficient. But let me look at these different groups. So for English, for economically disadvantaged students, only 30% of them were proficient. Or in this case, for students with disabilities, 18% of those students, I'm reading that number is kind of small. I think it says 18% were proficient. So it breaks it down into these different subgroups. You can also look at the grade level information here. Anytime you click on an item to make it expand, you have to click on it a second time to make it shrink. So once expands, second time shrinks. So just important to note as you're looking through. Another couple of items I just want to point out just so you understand what they represent. This line here with the 64, this is actually what's called the target for the state target. So the state is required by federal law to come up with targets for the entire state. So it's the same target regardless of the school in the state. And this is the target that we hope all schools will achieve this given year, 2021. The actual growth, you have to hover over the bar, and that shows you the actual growth, which you can see to the right of that, what's popping up there. This is 66%. So they're a little bit above the state target. I talked about this. We also saw the longitudinal data. In context, I should just talk about again. So again, yellow here is Portsmouth Middle School, the school we're looking at, and that's their percent proficient. The blue is the district. So we can see that although they have 66% proficient, the district is doing a little bit better. They're actually about 72% proficient. And then the state is not doing quite so well. They're doing around 52% proficient. for ELA. If you hover over these, you can actually see that detail. So, and it's actually broken down by grade. And this is a brand new addition, so you're one of the first folks seeing this. But this now, what it does is it breaks down that percent proficient for school, district, and state at each grade level. So this is where we can see that for Portsmouth Middle School, which is a 6th through 8th grade, they were on average about 66% proficient, I think, in ELA. But if we look at that, we can see that in grades 3, 4, and 5 for English, that the district, they're actually around up to as high as 85% proficient. So that's why we're seeing that students seem to be doing a little bit better at some of the lower grades, especially grades 4 and 5 within this district. So again, good piece of information for you to understand and to then maybe question it within the district and say, why is it we're dropping from 85% proficient in grade 5 down to 63% proficient in grade 6? And it could be a good conversation, within the curriculum group for the school or the grade level group. So that's achievement. I'm going to just go to one or two more of these, and then we'll jump to IDA, because I know this, again, might be more interest to you. But on these other tabs, as I just mentioned, you will see similar information. You'll see the overall information. So here for educator, we're looking at what the indicators that are provided for educator include what percentage of classes are taught by certified folks, educators certified in the subject, what percentage of classes are taught by interns, and what percentage of classes are taught by experienced educators. So experienced educators would be educators who've taught in New Hampshire for at least 3 years, and they've been deemed kind of effective in their area. The other indicator we actually have is average teacher salary. So this information, again, is displayed here. Some more detail about that information longitudinally is displayed below it, and then information about the indicator in context is displayed to the right in this case. So again, it's the same concept. In context, some overall longitudinal data, and then the primary data. I should also mention, I didn't say it before, but you'll see color themes. So here, blue is always the district, yellow is always the school, and green is always the state. In the prior screen, you might have seen red was always ELA. I think blue was math and green was science, or I might have those two switched. I'm going to point it out here, but we will go to a little bit more detail later. You can jump, say I wanted to look at some of this information across the entire state. I talked about how iPlatform, iReport, and iExplore are integrated. So you'll see these arrows that are pointing up here. I think maybe down, maybe sometimes up. This lets you jump from iReport, where you're looking at a given school or district, to iExplore, where you're looking at that information across the entire state. So here, if I want to take something like average teacher salary, and I click on this arrow, I'm now going to open up a new tab. So it doesn't close your report card, but opens a new tab. And now it's showing me cost per pupil, or average teacher salary. And it's showing me that for every school in the state. And I know we've had a question before, can you sort that? And actually you can. If you scroll down to the bottom of this, and you click on the bottom filter here, you actually don't have to scroll down. It now sorts it from top to bottom by the amount paid, the average cost. So you can look at this and decide where you want to go transfer. I'm just kidding. Okay, so I want to go back to iReport, but I just wanted to point out that you can jump between iReport and iExplore in that fashion. Let me point out a couple of other things about iReport. Again, our goal today isn't to give you detailed explanation about everything in the system, but it's at least to kind of get you started so you know where to go and you can kind of find things on your own. So with that in mind, one of the things I want to point out is that the tabs across the top, they do different things based on the type of school or district you're looking at. For example, I see a college here, but I'm looking at a middle school. So if I click on college when I'm looking at a middle school, just as you might expect, we're not going to get information. So this system tells us, well, you really want to select a different page because this information about college isn't relevant for middle school. I could, however, switch to a middle school. So if I change my school list, I actually have to go back to the district. I could also click to search for a completely different school. But if I go to the district, or if I choose the high school, now that information appears, because now if I'm talking about the district or I'm talking about high school, I'll see the information here about college. And so just like we saw before, same concept for college, we've got 4 indicators. We have the 4-year graduation rate, the 5-year graduation rate, what percentage of students get enroll in post-secondary, and what's the dropout rate. So these are our 4 indicators. You see the overall information, you see flyouts. So again, you can look at post-secondary enrollment, click on that. And, although it's 68% overall, you can see for students with disability, it's 47%. So it gives you that information for different subgroups when you click the flyout, like just like we saw before. You can look at the data over time. You can look at the data in context. So same concept that you saw in some of those other tabs. Finance is another area that you will typically only get, you'll get much more detail in finance at the district level. We only collected, the state only collects data for the most part, at least that when you're breaking down revenue or breaking down expenditures at the district level. So you'll get a lot more information at the district level than you will at the school level. IDEA, let's jump to that because that certainly should be of interest to many of you. And I have to profess I'm not an expert on the IDEA data, but hopefully this will make even more meaning to you than it might to me, but hopefully I can help explain it. So the IDEA data is data that we have to provide to the federal government based on students who are receiving special, who are eligible for IEP or receiving special education services. And there are 14 different indicators that we have to provide data for about students who are receiving special education funds. And that includes everything from graduation rate to dropout rate to preschool outcomes to secondary transitions and post-school outcomes. So for each one of those indicators, you'll see an arrow to the right. And if you click on that arrow, that'll bring that indicator into view. So right now we might be looking at graduation rate, but I can jump down to preschool environment. And this will tell me what information about preschool indicator programs for 3 to 5 year olds. Again, what this is going to show us is both the district as well as the state and the data. You'll see the description of the different indicators that have to be provided are displayed here. If you want to no longer want to see that indicator, you click the X and that hides it. Click the X again, that'll hide one. I can click on any one of these secondary transition and we'll see that data again for the school district, for the state, and then also the target, I guess. I'm not sure there may not be a target here. So know that these IDA report data is here. There's a description of what's included here as well. So I encourage you to take a look at that. If you have any questions about the specifics within these indicators, please, by all means, either ask them now or email us. And if Dina or I can't answer them, we certainly can hopefully get you the answer. Okay. So I think, the one last thing I want to show you, I always forget, is I wanted to show you the downloadability. So one of the nice features that's been added to iReport is a really nice way to download a report card for your data. So here you can click on the download. You can select the type of report card. For example, you can have a summary that just has some general information. You can have a detail that basically has all the indicators for your school or your district that are kind of then put out in one PDF. So you can see everything from ELA proficiency broken down by subgroup, including students with disabilities, to all the other information that exists from these different indicators. It's a nice, easy format to tell you how to download it. You can actually just click download PDF, and it'll actually open up a PDF with, actually tells you, helps you download that information in a certain format. Okay, I think that covers what I wanted to talk about in terms of iReport. I think the next thing we'll do is spend a little bit more time looking at iExplore. But I'm going to pause for a quick second and just ask Dina if there's any other questions or if there's anything I missed that you want to point out.
No, you got it spot on, Mike. I just want to add that indicator C for assessment for IDEA this year is actually new. Prior to this year, I don't know if everybody knows that, but prior to this, the reporting was done at all grades level. The requirement for this year is to break it down by grade level and to break it down by outcomes. So we used to report on participation rate proficiency. Now we have to report DLM proficiency as well as proficiency gap. So this is all information that's being reported for the first time by subject as well this year.
Thank you, Dina. Okay, so let me go jump to iExplore. So as we talked about before, just like iReport, the way you maneuver iExplore is to click on the different tabs across the top. The default tab is this Explore tab. And as we were looking before, it lets you, we were looking at average teacher salary. But you can choose any indicator you want. So for example, I could choose, let's choose classes taught by certified educators. This is gonna, this may not be a great indicator because everybody's too high. Let me choose a different one. Let's choose economically disadvantaged students. So what this is showing us is the percentage of students who are economically disadvantaged. And actually, this is a good example. What this does is it takes any indicator. So here we're looking at the percentage of students who are economically disadvantaged, and we're looking at the entire state. And so we're seeing each school in the state from highest to lowest. So here we've got Beach Street School, who has 82% of their students are economically disadvantaged. Economic disadvantage, to be identified as economically disadvantaged, basically we're saying that the student is eligible for free and reduced lunch. And that's New Hampshire's indicator, eligibility for free and reduced lunch, that's used to determine kind of poverty or percentage of families, students living in families that are struggling financially. So here we've got Beach Street has, I guess, the highest concentration of students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Anytime you're exploring an indicator, on the right side of the screen, what you see is that indicator. So here on the y-axis, you'll see that indicator, percentage of students economically disadvantaged. So schools that may have no students economically disadvantaged, up to the top, which should be Beach Street School. And so if I hover over any dot, it actually shows you that school. In that case here is Beach Street. From left to right, regardless of what indicator you have here, you'll see the average proficiency or the percent proficiency in math and ELA combined. So what percentage of students in math and ELA are proficient within that school? And it shows you if there's a correlation between those two. And so as we can see here, and there's not a lot of factors that are correlated quite this strongly, but what we see here is that as you've got a higher percentage, a lower percentage of economically disadvantaged, as you have a higher percentage of economically disadvantaged students, you have a lower percentage of students who are proficient. So as we increase in proficiency, we are seeing less students economically disadvantaged. And so there seems to be a correlation between poverty and proficiency. Not to say, and this is a great example, it's not to say it's a causation. It's not because the student's poor, but it is an effect that we're seeing some type of correlation between the two factors. There's many factors that might be driving that, causing it to happen, but there is a correlation. There's what's called the Pearson R value. So for those of you who are math folks, it's very important, even if you're not a math folk, it's very important to look at this. If you're somebody who likes math, then you can explore it a little bit more detail. But a correlation you're only demonstrating a moderate to strong correlation if you're at least 0.7 or 0.8. So even 0.7 is on the borderline of showing a correlation, but it is showing us that there's some type of correlation. Any number greater than 0.7, less than negative 0.7, so kind of 0.8, 0.9, negative 0.8, negative 0.9, those are showing us there is some level of pretty strong correlation. We'll talk more about that because I'm going to go through another example a little bit later. The next option here is compare. Actually, I'll skip over compare just for an interest of time, but this basically lets you compare two states or a state and the school, or two different schools, or a school and a district. It lets you compare two entities and see how they're doing across all their indicators. Discover. Discover lets you discover whether there's a correlation between any two indicators. So in Explore, we were always looking at one indicator compared to math and ELA. In Discover, you can choose two indicators that may have nothing to do with assessment. So for example, I may want to choose, let's choose cost per pupil, for example. So we're going to look at finance, which is cost per pupil. So average cost per pupil. And then I'm going to compare average cost per pupil to maybe experience of teachers. So classes taught by experienced educators. So I want to see, is there a correlation between the classes that are taught by the number of percentage of classes taught by an experienced educator and the cost per pupil. And in fact, what we find here is an R value of 0.22, which is low. Again, it's got to be really 0.8, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9 to show you some type of moderate or strong correlation. And so here we're seeing is, although maybe as price goes up, we see experience go up a little bit, it's not really a correlation. You've got plenty of schools that have low cost per pupil and low experience, and you have also schools that have high cost per pupil and low experience. So there's not really a correlation between these two variables. So it's a fun way, not a fun way, but it's an interesting way to explore some different correlations and see what's out there in the world, in the New Hampshire world. That's the other thing I should point out is all this data is, we're just looking at New Hampshire schools. So realize it's not, there may be that in other states or other environments that there may be a correlation, even though we're not seeing them here. You can also, you'll see on most of these screens the ability to filter too. So I haven't really done much of that, but I could say that I only want to look at charter schools, for example. So I'm going to unselect everything and just select charter schools. And now we'll just see the dots for the charter schools in the state. Maybe you're in the North Country and you want to look at just North Country schools. So you could look at a given region and say, I only want to look at schools in the North Country. So again, a nice way for you to kind of zero in on certain schools in the state and look for correlations, or even in Explore, you could explore just for a certain part of the state. You may also want to see if there might be a correlation in the North Country, but there's not a correlation across the state, and things like that could happen as well. I'm going to skip search because we're going to go to it in a little while. It's one of my favorite tools. But let's jump, download data, lets you download the data. So just as I mentioned earlier, you can choose any indicator and actually download that data if you want to pull it into Excel on your own computer. 1 second here. So I could choose any indicator. So maybe I want to choose, perhaps you want to choose the students involved with who are up on IEP. So it's escaping me now. I will find it though.
It's towards the end, Mike. It's special students with disabilities at the bottom.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
On the spot and I couldn't find it. So if you want to look at that indicator, for example, you could select that indicator, and now we're going to look at percentage of students on an IEP. So it's now showing us every school in the state. You could look at schools or you could look at districts, and it's showing you for years from 2017 through 2021. So here you could quickly download this to your CSV file, bring it into Excel, and you might do some searching throughout the state to look at information across for different schools around the state. Okay. Oh, last thing I want to point out before we go to back to some scenarios that I want to describe is definitions. So the definitions for all these types of indicators, there's what's called a data dictionary. You click on this little arrow, it'll open up the data dictionary. And this actually brings you into an information that tells you about these different indicators. So again, if I chose something like students with disabilities, it'll tell you, what does this indicator mean? What's the source of the system? So in reality, this data comes from the Nessus system, which I imagine you all are familiar with. And it describes how that data is transferred to the department. So it's a great tool to get a better understanding of an indicator if you're not exactly sure what that indicator represents. Okay, so let me go back to the presentation. That was a quick demo. We're not completely done with the demo. We're going to do some more examples, but I just wanted to bring us back to the presentation and do two things. One is I want to point out that this presentation, actually, I'll take this presentation right now. There's a link to it, and I'm going to put it in the chat session. So if you want this presentation, it is available, and you can access it through the link that I just put in the chat session. I will also, while we're here, I just want to triple check and make sure that we've shared this so that it's accessible to all of you. And let me just change this real quick. I apologize. So you all now can access this presentation with the link I just shared. In the presentation, there's some of the things I pointed out through iReport and iExplore are listed here, so you can look at these if you want to go back and look at some of the things that I either meant to or did explain. Actually, a couple of things I just realized I need to explain, so I'll go back and do that. And then the other thing I wanted to now bring us to is I put down some scenarios. So one of the things we're hoping to share with you is help you understand, what are questions you might ask that you could then answer through iReport or iExplore. And so I'm going to walk you through a couple of examples that do that. So the first one, I am interested in how students on an IEP performed in my district. How did that compare to the state? So maybe I'm curious about how students in my district or my school, my district in this case, did on the math and the ELA assessment, and how did that compare to the state? So a great way to do that, because I'm thinking about my school, is to go to iExplore, because you want to look, or my district, you want to look at how students did in your district. We'll stick with Portsmouth for this example. You click on achievement, because we're looking at how did my students do an achievement in my school or in my district. And then if you click on the arrow I showed you before, this will break it down, because we wanted to look at students on an IEP. So remember, this flyout will drill down and show us proficiency. How did students do? 30% of the students were proficient on the ELA assessment. I'm looking at 2021 who were on an IEP. Now the question I wanted to ask, and so it was 30% in ELA, and let's say for math, it was 24%. But our question two was, how did that compare to the state? So the easiest way, or the way I like to do that, is I go down and I open up the state report. So at the bottom of the screen is a state report. If I click on that, I'm going to open up a new tab. So I still have this tab that's showing me my 24% of my students on who are on IEP were proficient in math. And I saw that, 30% in ELA. So 30% in ELA, 24% in math, and it looks like 16% in science. If I go to this state report and I choose achievement, I can do the same thing. I can click on the arrow next to here. And so where I had 30% of the students in Portsmouth who are on IEP were proficient, only 15% of students on who have a disability were proficient across the state. So almost twice as high a percentage in the school district we're looking at. For math, I think it was 24 for the district, it's 11 for the state. And then for science, I can't remember, I think it was 15 or so for the district, and it looks like it's 11 for the state. Let me just make sure, I don't remember if it was 16 for the district. So again, that would be one way that you could look at what is the percent proficient for students who are on IEP in my district, and then open up the state report to see what it looks like at the state level. Let's go back to the presentation. So that's one example of one scenario that you might have and how you could use iReport in that case to find out the answer. Let's look at the next one. Our middle school switched math programs a few years ago, and I want to see if the math performance over the past, I want to see what happened to the math performance over the past 3 years. So again, we're thinking about my school. I'm looking at how did my math do over the past 3 years. And so we're talking about a middle school. So here I'm going to jump back to iReport. We will, in this case, just to make it easy, we'll stick in the same district and choose the middle school. We said that we changed assessments 3 years ago, or textbooks, excuse me. Remember, I've got to click on these arrows again to make things shrink. And what I wanted to do was look longitudinally. So here I can see if I'm in 2021, and this is a little bit hard because we didn't have an assessment in 2020. That's how come you're not seeing any data here. But maybe we switched the assessment, the test actually back in 2017 or 18. And so here you can actually look longitudinally, did our math, if this is a math textbook, how did we do over the course of the 3 years after we switched textbooks? And so just one example, doesn't mean the textbook worked or didn't work, but it's one way that you might take a look and see if that seemed to have an impact on your results. In this case, the answer might be no. Or maybe, with time, maybe you are going a little bit up and maybe you'll continue to see growth, and maybe that will be over time. The textbook is helping out. The other thing I want to point out, because I didn't mention it earlier, are some of these values where you actually won't see data. So for example, if I go back to the profile for the school, there will be times that, again, we want to help this is public, so we need to maintain the privacy of students. So sometimes you'll see something like less than 10% or an N or an NA. All these are really different ways that we're helping ensure that we protect the identity of students. And so if there's less than 10% of your students are economically disadvantaged, we're not going to tell you it's 1 or 2%. We just say less than 10. Or if their number's too low, then we might have a star N or an NA if you've got no students. So just know that some of those times you'll see something because we want to protect the privacy, or we don't have enough data to show you. Typically, if you hover over it, it'll tell you the data is not available or the data is suppressed, etc. You might see, I think, CS for coming soon if we don't have the data displayed, ready to display yet. Okay, back to our scenarios. Okay, this is one of my favorite ones. I'm on the school board and our school has been struggling with our performance on the state assessment test. I want to talk with similar districts who are performing better on the assessment. Who should I contact? So we've been struggling with our assessments. Maybe it's our math assessment. And I want to look at other schools in the state that might be similar to mine to see if I can reach out to them and find out how they're doing. Well, maybe I am a school that's fair size. Maybe I've got 300 students in my school. So I really only want to look at schools that are sizable. I may not want to look at a school with 30 kids because maybe they're not going to necessarily have the same issues that I may have at my school. I may also be a school that has a fairly high percentage of students who are on IEP. I said 15%, but maybe it's actually 20% or something fairly high. So I may only want to look at schools that have, again, a significant population of IEP students. So one way to do that is now we're looking across schools. We're saying what schools around the state. So we know that we have to go to iExplore because we're not talking about one school, we're talking about schools across the state. And the way to search for schools is to use the search feature. This search feature lets you look for different criteria. So for example, we wanted to look at, I'm going to say math proficiency. So I'm going to choose proficiency in math. And just by doing that, we're now going to see all the schools or districts in the state. And I will make sure if I've got schools selected. So we're seeing all the schools in the state and what percentage of their students were proficient. And we'll see it's sorting it from greatest to lowest. So these are all schools that had at least 90% of their students proficient. So very high proficiency for their students that they're doing, for one reason or another, their students are doing really well. But we were interested in maybe finding out information about schools with large number of students who have been identified as students who have an IEP. We also talked about only wanting to look at schools or larger, so I'm going to choose total enrollment. And I might want to look at something else, like maybe I want to look at, say, educator experience. So classes taught by experienced educators. And now what I can do is I can say, let's filter this list. So rather than looking at all the schools in the state, I only want to look at schools that have at least 15%, or maybe I'll say, let's say 20% and see what we find. 20% of students on an IEP. That's a fairly, very high percentage of students on an IEP. Well, here we still have a lot of schools with students who have a high percentage of students with a disability. Total enrollment, maybe we said we only want schools with at least 300 students. Oops. And so now this is limiting it a bit. And so now we're seeing schools that are still doing very well, but have a higher percentage of students with a disability. And so maybe now it's still a large list. So maybe I'm gonna have to tell her some other way. Maybe I really want to look for schools that, have at least 400 students. So we're getting bigger schools. Now we're starting to narrow it down a little bit. And so this is one way. Maybe I want to look at students with a higher percentage of students with disabilities. So maybe I really want, 23% or something. And so again, this is now narrowing it down a little bit more. And again, at this point, we might want to reach out to these schools. Maybe I only want to look at middle schools. So rather than looking at all schools, I could just be looking at a certain grade span as well. So a nice way for you to find schools around the state that meet certain criteria, and then maybe you want to reach out to them and talk to some folks in their schools. Excuse me, I'm going to just plug my computer in 1 second so I don't lose power. Sorry about that. So that's just another scenario that you might have. We've got 2 more I just want to walk through. I know we're getting towards the end of the time. I want to know if the average class size of my child's school is above or below the state average. So maybe you want to look at whether it's your child or whether you're a teacher in the school, you want to look at the average class size and see how that varies. So again, I'm looking at iExplore because I'm thinking about exploring across the state. The easiest way to do that is click on the Explore. I wanted to look at the average class size and see how that compares across the state. So I click down here and I find average class size. I could choose what year I want to look at. I could choose whether I want to look at schools or districts. And here I've got the list. And so now I'm seeing the average class size. There's clearly was a problem with the reporting that we had from Merrimack. I don't think they have 171 students per school per class. So this is more reasonable. These are the ones that we see. So it's anywhere from 25% down to or 25 students down to very small class sizes. So just an easy way to look at class size across the state. Okay, finally, one more question, I think. Is there a correlation factor between, is there a correlation factor between the cost per student and percent of students on an IEP? Yes, so let's take a look at that. So is there a correlation between what the cost is per student compared to the percentage of students who are on IEP? So if I want to look at that, that's the Discover tab, because we're going to discover a correlation between 2 variables that have nothing to do with achievement. So here I'm going to choose cost per pupil, and we said percentage of students who are on IEP. So I believe that is probably in the profile, if I remember correctly. Yes, students with disabilities. So now we're taking a look at, and I limited to the North Country, but let's select everybody. And so now we're going to see students with disabilities, so that's coming up in the top. We're looking at average cost per pupil along the right. And in fact, we look at the R value of 0.14. So this is saying within New Hampshire, within the data we're looking at, there really is not a correlation because this number is not above, 0.7, 0.8. It's not below negative 0.7, 0.8. So it's showing there's really no correlation. And it doesn't matter whether you have a high cost per pupil, you could have a low student with this percentage of students with a disability or a higher percentage. So what we're seeing here is if somebody was arguing that your school is much more expensive per pupil because of your special education population, that's not what this is showing us, at least from this set of data that we're looking at. Okay, let me pause for a second, see if there's any other questions. I don't think there are any. So let me just go through the last couple of slides, and I really appreciate everybody taking the time to learn about iPlatform. So last few slides, I wanted to point out some helpful hints. Again, you've got access to this presentation. We've pointed out some of these things along the road, things like how colors typically mean something. This is actually a different meaning of colors that I didn't mention, but this is here as well. Definitely click on question marks, hover over things because you'll get extra help. Help will pop up. Make sure you've got the right year you're looking at. Remember, if you click on an arrow, it has something fly out. You got to click on it again so it shrinks. A variety of different things. Don't forget to look at the Pearson R value if you're thinking about correlations. And then finally, talking a little bit about the schedule. Most all the data is now out. There's a couple of things I didn't point out, but there's some good data out in the system now. Things like I showed you the ability to break it down by grade, the blue ribbon information, and there's some information about charter schools that allow you to see how charter schools or students are doing compared to where their home district typically is located. This coming June, there'll be some additional dashboards available for both achievement and growth. So those are going to be coming. So there's going to be some great dashboards that tell you a little bit more about how your students are doing from an achievement perspective and a growth perspective. It'll help you understand what percentage of your students are taking the test and how does that seem to impact the results. Next year, probably in the November timeframe, we're going to try to get out as soon as we can. We'll have the release to the question that was asked earlier of this year's data. So that'll be released sometime, late fall, early winter next year. We have been having a lot of trainings, just like this. There will be more trainings coming. So please, share the link to these videos as well as let folks know about these other trainings that are coming up. And I'll show you in just one bit where you find out that information. Finally, the last thing, after I show you the website where you can get to the training videos, I will leave this up, and this is our contact information. I cannot stress enough that we are absolutely here to help answer questions. If you're playing around with iPlatform and you're struggling, by all means, reach out to us. We don't want that to happen, and we are always here to help. If you, again, search for iPlatform NH on the main iPlatform page, one of the things you will see is a link to the training. So down here is a link to the training resources. This will show you some of these other upcoming trainings that we're going to have. We're going to do one for school counselors, one for EL teachers. There's also links to some of the posted videos, so you can get to video recordings here as well. Most of these videos about iPlatform are fairly similar. So even if you don't see the one we did today, you can certainly have friends click on these other ones and they'll get a certainly good sense of the overview of iPlatform. So with that, I know I went through this fairly quickly, but hopefully it was helpful for you to give you an overview of the system. By all means, if there are questions, I'm going to hang on for a minute or two longer. But thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you, Dina, so much for all your hard work in making this a reality. Lots of thanks to the commissioner and Caitlin Davis and Nate Green and folks who are kind of leading up this effort at the department. We really hope that this is helpful in helping everybody get a better understanding of how schools are doing in the state, and helping us learn how to find ways to make schools even better. Thank you very much, and do have a wonderful rest of the day.